All right, fair warning. This is going to be a rough one.
Gather us in the lost and forsaken. Gather us in the blind and the lame.
All right, let's do this. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the edition of the Performer Cigar Garage Talks. I am hoping, beyond hope, that this will be my last video in the garage for a while. Spring is kind of sprung. We are getting that warm weather back. It's going to be a good one. I can't wait. Again, warning, the intro didn't tip it off. This one's going to be a little bit on the rougher side. Talking about my childhood growing up, some of my views of my childhood growing up, and kind of taking a deep dive into how I'm raising my kids. Before we get too deep, what are we smoking? What are we drinking? From Grand Habano, we have blue and green. Fun cigar. It's actually wrapped in cedar. They come in these little cedars, really thin paper cedar that wraps the cigar. I do like a cedar wrapped cigar. I thought the cedar was just there for flavor. It wasn't until, actually, I think just a couple years ago, that I learned you're supposed to light this on fire and then light your cigar off of that to make it that cedar wood match. Pretty cool. I did that this time. I have some extra little pieces of cedar lying around that you can see. Who knows, in case you need to touch up the old cigar, it's sitting there. Kind of also still celebrating, we have another Dragon's Milk. Dragon's Milk Reserved Oatmeal Cookie. I've had a couple others of Dragon's Milk, of New Holland Brewing's Dragon's Milk, of different types. I was not impressed. This is a new one, though, so we're going to try it. It's supposed to be barrel-aged stout that is flavored to taste like an oatmeal cookie. We'll try it out here. Give you guys a little impressions. The first time I ever had this one. Not much of a head on there, but that barrel aged are not always. It's okay. Cinnamon, brown sugar, raisin, oats, and vanilla extract in there. I probably won't buy that one again. As I went off in a different video, the barrel ages, I'm not behind them. It's kind of like IPA. More hops doesn't make better beer, and a barrel doesn't improve all flavor of everything. I hate to tell you. Before we get into the topic tonight, just a fun little story. Apparently we're getting bees. My wife and daughter ran into the bee guy at church, got talking, and apparently we have two packs of bees coming in for us. So that's great. So excited. But anyway, on tonight's topic, so as you can tell from the video title, can a good home make a strong child? Now, why do I say this? I do firmly believe that me and homeschooling mama have our kids are growing up in a really good home. We're very attentive. We take care of them. We cater to their needs, make sure even their wants are covered. Of course, everything food and shelter and all that they've always had. Our love, attention, affection, stewards of what a good marriage should be. That's what my kids are growing up with. I didn't. And I know some of my sisters, if they ever watch this, will definitely argue with me, but sorry, girls, you grew up in a different family than I did. You were all moved out, pretty much, by the time our parents got a divorce. And it was an absolute shit show. A lot of my formative years were spent in, leading up to the divorce, arguing and fighting parents, and parents were absentee. During the divorce, it was a bloodbath. And then after the divorce, it was complete and utter forgetting and displacement. So my sisters will talk about how, they were, our parents won Family of the Year. They volunteered for everything. They were recognized. They were, pillars of the community. um, that kind of dropped off when me and my brother were born, or after me and my brother were born. I do firmly believe that we were the one more children, right? Our marriage will be happy again. We just have to have another children. If we have one more child, everything will be better. That never works. Just in case you're wondering, if you're thinking about, well, we're having fights or issues. If we have another kid, everything will get better. It won't. You already have issues and problems you need to work out. Do not bring another child into that misery until you work your stuff out. Because that one more never solves anything. Never has, never will. So I firmly believe both me and my brother were that one more because there was such a large gap between my sisters and then me. And then another large gap between me and my brother. I believe we both were that one more child. So there's that. It was really rough growing up, having the older sisters and the younger brother, even though I'm not the official middle child. There always was the attention given to the older children, the older sisters, my younger brother. Good example of that, my sisters, they got every car purchased for them. Every vehicle I've ever driven, I had to buy with my own money. My brother has 50-50. Some vehicles he bought, some vehicles he was just given. I've never been given a vehicle by my family, by my parents. The only thing they did do is when I was in high school, they paid for insurance for my vehicle. I then quickly took that over once I moved out to college. Coming from a divorced family. So during the divorce, it was a bloodbath, right? One of my good friends, he also came from a divorce home. He says, it's always infuriating. During the divorce, each parent's like, well, I love my child more. I couldn't dream of not having my child around. I want more time. I want more this. I want more that. Which you think is good, but then after the divorce, the inevitable happens. This is your mom's weekend. This is your dad's weekend. Your mom needs to pay for that. Your dad needs to pay for that. Why can't the other one do more? Ask them. Stop asking me for X, Y, or Z. Rides, money, food, whatever. Growing up, after the divorce, I paid for a lot of my brother's food bills, for his lunch bills. He had going for some seconds of food or whatnot. And they were threatening to not let him even get food. So I ended up paying for a good chunk of his meals. Because my divorced parents couldn't get their shit together to actually care for their kids. They instead decided to care more about themselves. Probably what led to the divorce, if I'm completely honest, is they cared more about themselves than they did their two boys, for sure. So it was not a pleasant place to live in. We were used as collateral. There was arguments over alimony and child support constantly. Both my parents played both me and my brother against the other sibling, or the other parent. And by and large, we were forgotten. So I did everything I could to stay away from my house. I went on long camping trips. I volunteered to be a counselor gig and go take kids out into the woods. I even went to Maryland for a while, just so I could not be around my mom and my dad. The second I could get a vehicle and could get my driver's license, I did, so I could take off and have my own freedom. Once I graduated high school, I barely came home. Avoided it like the plague as much as I could. I tried to stay at college. I tried to go work more jobs in Maryland. Just as much as I could, stay as far away from my family as I could. And it was better that way. I mean, I wasn't missing out, in my opinion. Honestly, I don't feel like I was missing out. There was no love back in one of my friends, I have many years. I think it was like 5 to 8 years after I graduated from college. They kept saying, well, do you ever make it back home? And I kind of laughed. It's like, well, yeah, I make it home every night. I go home to my wife. Like, no, your actual home. Your home over in Houghton. No. One, that's not my home. Two, I haven't considered my home, and even when I lived there for many years. Now, I'm not trying to get a sob story. I'm not trying to get you to feel bad for me. I do firmly believe that that shaped who I am. Definitely put me in a position to where I am. Some of it good, some of it bad. I'm not going to say it was all, it's all roses and it's a wonderful thing I went through. That, of course not. It was horrifying. Anyone who puts their child through that needs to reevaluate their life decisions. That being said, my children are growing up in a vastly different home than what I grew up in. And it's difficult. My oldest son really, until just recently, did not want to move out. He wanted to just live with mom and dad and stay with mom and dad. He didn't want to run away. He still doesn't have his driver's license. He doesn't see a need for it. I needed my driver's license. I needed to get away and be able to have that freedom to run. It was very comforting to know that I could just jump in my car and go. My son doesn't need that. He feels comfortable at home. He doesn't feel like he needs to run away. And again, that's weird for me. I have a really hard time with that because that wasn't something that, I ever thought about. Just the other day, the two oldest, Vashman and Swedish Compass, were working their shift. It was a longer shift. I think they went in at 4 or is it 5 and they get done till 10 or something. Because of scheduling issues, they did not eat a meal before going to work. So the meal they had was at lunch at noon, and then they didn't eat again until 9 or 10 at night. And both of them were like, "Oh, I have headaches. I have the shakes. My stomach's all upset. I just this pain in my stomach. I've never had this before." And I was kind of weirded out. I was like, "Oh, is something medically wrong?" But then it dawned on me. They've never really gone without eating. Me and homeschooling mama always make sure that they eat. They have a meal. They have food. There's food in the house. There's snacks. There's treats. We're willing to go out to eat if we're starting to run close to a mealtime. So of course, they get hungry, but they haven't truly been hungry. They never, had where they want food, but no food is there. I can definitely say, growing up, I had the opposite. I knew it was like to be hungry. I knew it was like to go most of the day without eating. Now, homeschooling mama did tell me to make sure that I make this known. Some of that is of my own accord. I was working for theaters. I worked a job. I volunteered on the ambulance. I was taking EMT class. So there were times when I was just out of the house. And some of that was, I just did not, wasn't able to go get food or didn't have money to get food. But again, my kids have never had that problem. We make sure that they have food. They have access to food. We remind them to eat. We remind them to take money. If they need money, we give them it for food. That wasn't a thing for me growing up. If I needed to eat, I needed to get my own money. Beg, borrow, or steal so I could have a meal. Both my mom and dad never ran me over food when I was working, in the theater and whatnot, where I did for Vashman and Swedish Compass when they got into theater. I knew they were going straight from rehearsals to practice to play. I ran them food. And I still would today. I make sure they have food, they have meals. That wasn't a thing growing up. Not for me. I know my sisters will recant that and say that they were well fed and fattened, but again, you did not grow up in the same house I did. I hate to tell you. I know it's hard to hear and hard to believe, but it's true. We grew up in two totally different homes. So the argument can be made, am I babying my kids? Am I stunting them for life? I can definitely tell you when I got off on my own, there wasn't much that surprised me. I knew about bills. I knew about buying food and budgeting and rationing and whatnot. Vashman, I do kind of fear. He might not understand that. He's definitely not budgeting or rationing his money he's making from his job. He's spending that quite liberally, and I fear he's going to find out when he goes off to college that dad telling him to pump the brakes on his spending wasn't just a funny suggestion. It was a heartfelt piece of advice. We'll see. But it is a question I have, and I don't know if I can answer it yet. I'd like to believe, and I've had other parents tell me, other friends who have expressed this concern too, that I did suffer a lot of negative effects. Besides the positive ones, being hardened to the world and ready for the world and ready for money and budgeting and all that. I'm a very cynical person, very detached. I know homeschooling mama loved me, but I did have issues, realizing other people could care about me, could pay attention to me, or, not use me for their own devices. It was a very hard thing to learn. There are other negative effects I have. Stuff like, drinking, even smoking could be argued were some of the side effects of, I've had some escapes when I was younger. So, I don't know. I do hope that I am raising my kids right, and that them growing up in a totally different household than what I grew up in will not stunt them. That they will be able to succeed in life and still be ready for life. It is my biggest worry. I guess I'll find out in a couple of years. I'll do maybe for my 30th, when we celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary, hopefully our 40th wedding anniversary even, when I can do an update and tell you if you should have a good home to raise your kids in, or should you have some controversy? Should you have some division and decisiveness and neglectfulness? Is there something to that? I don't know. I know not much of marriage advice here, right? But it's something I'm coming to terms with. I 110% do not want my kids to grow up how I did. It was a rough and tough life. It did lead to a lot of issues I still deal with today. It shaped me to the person I am today, which if you know me, you might tell me, no, run from the hills. I don't know. I'm definitely seeing some indications that maybe my kids are not as ready for the real world as I'd like them to be, and I'm blaming myself for that. Too nice, I guess. But anyway, folks, we can only look towards the past to answer questions that the future won't tell us, right? Give it your best guess and see what happens. I do know, unfortunately, if it does stunt my children, I can't have them grow up how I did. And I still firmly believe, even though I might be wrong, my feelings are no kid should grow up how I did. So, folks, learn from the past, look towards the future, but know that at the end of the day, you're going to have more questions than answers. So, with that, stay safe out there. I'm going to go finish this cigar. See you on the next one.